Canonical. I'm James Shao, and I'm joined by Ed Darris and Sam Spieler.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi, guys. Today we are continuing our series on contemporary Chinese sci-fi with Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang. Since this is a review, we won't reveal any spoilers. If you haven't read the book yet, you can keep on listening. If you'd like to join our discussion, you can find our book club on Reddit by clicking on the link in the episode description. And if you'd like to support us and your local bookstore, you can use our bookshop.org link, which is also in that episode description. At the bookshop store page, you can find books for our book club and the other books that we recommend. You can also find us on social media at Canonical Pod. Next week, we'll be having an in-depth discussion of this book, Vagabonds. We hope you'll join us for that episode as well. So let's start with you, Yed, since this was your pick for our series. Can you tell us why this book is noteworthy?
Yeah, so Hao Jingfang is one of the most prominent young writers in this new wave of Chinese science fiction. She's an economist by day and a sci-fi writer by night, and she is pretty prominent after Liu Cixin won the award for Three Body Problem. She was the second Chinese national to win a Hugo. She won for her story Folding Beijing. It won the category they call Best Novelette, which is actually more of a short story category. But this is her first novel, and it was published in English last year.
I like that you called her a young writer. She's around our age, so I guess that means we are young as well.
Young at heart.
What is a novelette? It's shorter than a novella, longer than a short story?
They don't have a short story category. They call everything a novelette, a novella, or a novel.
Oh. That's stupid.
It doesn't make
Cute
sense. Yeah,
name.
It's a Hugo thing. Also, did you know that a Hugo is not given out by a committee? It's just write-in. It's fan voting.
So this won a fan vote, or at least not this book, but Folding Beijing did, huh?
Which, I don't know. I mean, that's another thing in itself, but I don't really respect it as much. I thought it was a committee of quote-unquote experts.
And now I'm thinking back to what else won the Hugo. Did Wind Up Girl win the Hugo?
I think so.
Yes, I think so.
That explains a lot.
So it's not even like an academy type of voting?
No, it's not an academy.
So they'd let anyone vote. That means you too, Sam.
Yep. You could vote for yourself. You could write for your erotic fiction.
They must have some kind of short list, though. They can't let anyone vote for anything. It must have been published somewhere in order for it to qualify, I'd bet.
Yeah, not too sure. So, in brief, the novel is the aftermath of a kind of interplanetary study abroad program. This novel takes place after Mars has been colonized and it has been settled by human beings. And after a war of independence between Earth and the human settlers on Mars, a group of young Martians return to Earth and they spend 5 years there. And then they return back to Mars. The novel centers around the kind of reverse culture shock that's experienced by the protagonist, Loying Sloan, as she is trying to understand how she feels about the difference between culture and government on Mars and on Earth, and also trying to understand her own family history.
I guess you might also say that this book is about the Martian colony at a crossroads, politically and also developmentally.
Yeah, near the end of the novel, they do have a big choice to make about how they will continue their life on Mars. And that was just the final underwhelming aspect of this novel in a series of underwhelming aspects.
So it sounds like we're getting into how we feel about this novel. And you're talking about the last third, the last section of the book, because the book is split into 3 sections.
It's split into 3 sections. None of the sections really seem to matter much to each other, and they don't really matter much to the reader, if I'm honest. This book is bad. I mean, I don't know how to say it in a nice way. This book is a turd, you know? We talked a bit before about transhumanist science fiction and whether or not we could understand a transhuman thought. I don't think we can understand a Martian thought. I think that the way that these people live and the way that the narrator narrates what's going on Mars it's just unlike any real human being that I've ever met. And the characters are unbelievable. They're so earnest and corny. The plot is flaccid. The descriptions are overwritten. It's just really bad from top to bottom. But inside of this novel, there is an interesting idea. And it's just an interesting idea that's waiting for a good writer to pick it up and actually do something with it.
I disagree with it a tad in that I thought the first section was fine. I didn't have any issue with the book really until the second section when one of the main characters from the first section just kind of disappears. And I was like, oh, well, I hope he comes back. And then, nope, not really. And I was like, okay, interesting choice. Kind of feel lost now.
Considering he was like the second main character.
Yeah. I mean, it feels a bit like, okay, so she's won an award for her short story. And I guess my takeaway is that she doesn't know how to write a novel at all. If her first section was shortened into a short story, it probably would be a pretty good short story, but it wasn't. It was a third of a novel. So what, 100 plus pages? And that's my takeaway from this, is that I think she has no idea how to write a novel. And I think that she probably is better off sticking with the short story form. Well, or learning how to write a novel, I guess. I mean, I don't think it's impossible for her to improve, but that's my takeaway from this book. But I did like the first part. Like you, Ed, I thought the other two parts were kind of a drag to read.
I liked them in descending order. So the first was the most interesting, second less so, third dead last.
Let me give the reader an example, because I think that you guys are talking a lot about the pacing of the novel, but it really is a drag in terms of just the description and the overall sensibility that Hao Jingfang brings to the novel. In this part, the characters are trying to build an airplane, and the narration is sketching on her notepad. Loyang listened to them, but didn't interrupt. Soren's eyes were spirited and intense. Mira's messy hair draped around his round brown face. Anka was slouching, and one of his shoes was off, but he still looked slender and handsome against the pillar. What kind of novel is this? This is like, it's meant for a teenage girl to get very hot and bothered by these asexual kind of handsome boys. It's not written with an adult sensibility. It's written with a very infantile, corny teenage sensibility, and it's just really unappealing to me.
My comment here was it reads like a Chinese soap opera. And it also reminds me, because I taught, as you guys know, at a Chinese university, it reminds me of the freshmen that I taught at this Chinese university, that they kind of have this very innocent, naive understanding of love and the world and how people work. It feels like that. It's a bit more damning because she is 36, or at the time of writing this, I guess in her 20s. I mean, it is rough. At the same time, I wonder how much we could ascribe this to translation. I don't think I would place a lot of blame at Ken Liu's feet, but I feel like Ken Liu also acknowledged his editor. There are multiple people complicit in this. I'm a bit curious about, all these other people where when they were reading this text, they thought, well, let's just let it go.
Reading various reviews on this and other books, I saw people that were quick to say that he tries to be transparent and that this doesn't sound like Liu Cixin. This doesn't sound like his other writing. It doesn't sound like his other translations. So if we're to take that person at his word, it's not the translation.
It's a definite sensibility difference between me and Hao Jingfang, and I want to say, like James, that it is like a Chinese soap opera. There's a definite kind of bland mainstream Chinese sensibility to her narrative that really is unappealing to me. It's not critical, it's not thoughtful, it's not insightful. It's just everything is okay. We're figuring things out, but things are mostly good. people are mostly good and young people are naive but charming in their naivete.
She also writes a lot about feelings, which is okay in small doses. It's that old cliche that I know I've used a lot.
Oh boy, which one is this one? I'm looking forward to this cliche. Go, go, go.
Telling rather than showing.
Oh, that one. I was hoping for red herring or
A MacGuffin.
MacGuffin.
I'll bring those in later somehow. But we're told how a character feels constantly and in great detail, but it's not a good explanation. We get that, Lu Ying is sad. Okay, now she's a different flavor of sad. Now she's confused. But we don't get the scene work that could tell us that. We don't see them doing anything meaningful except, drawing her knees up to her chest or staring longingly out the window.
There's a section in the book, and I think we're all on the same wavelength here, where she's this 18, 19-year-old, pretty girl, and she becomes friends with this guy in his 30s who's, they hang out a lot together.
The doctor?
Yeah. But it's a totally platonic relationship with no chemistry at all. Except for she views him as her teacher. And this is what reminds me of these really naive freshman college students. And so in some ways, it's very true to life to me. When I read that, I was just like, oh yeah, I totally taught students exactly like her. But at the same time, I was hoping maybe the two of them would bone. And I'd be like, yes, okay, a surprise.
Right.
This is where the book should be going. To use one of your terms, MacGuffin, the biggest MacGuffin in this freaking book is the Central Archive, which is so built up. And then in the second, 2/3 or whatever, it doesn't even appear anymore. And they're like, oh yeah, we've got that thing.
It's right. It's supposed to be central, but it doesn't seem to matter very much, except when it's used as a highly secretive thing that we have to protect from the Earth, because the Earth would use it for ill intent somehow.
So Sam, you actually went and read other reviews of this.
Yeah.
I read this book and I had no inclination to read any review of this book. I was done with it when I was done. You said to me off air that people were complimentary in some ways of this book.
Yeah.
I mean, in what way were they complimentary of this book?
So there's a review in the LA Review of Books by Virginia Kahn, where she talks pretty loftily about this misty, dreamlike feeling that we get throughout the book in terms of its plotting, its characters, its theme, and how she calls it masterful in how it gives the reader this hazy feeling of transience and imbalance, which is true, although I'm not sure about the masterful part. She called it nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
But without haziness, that transience, to me, it came across as abstruse and simple, idealistic, very aimless and tiresome and unfocused. So the things that she was talking about like a feature came across as a bug to me.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest here, Sam. The reason why I selected this novel is on the basis of Virginia Kahn's review.
Oh man, you were conned.
Because I saw that and I thought, well, I respect the Los Angeles Review of Books. And
it's a good review too, right?
Yeah, it's a good review. I hadn't read any of her work before. I hadn't read anything by Hao Jingfang. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. She's won a Hugo. Virginia Kahn likes this novel. I'm going to give it a shot. And I don't want to say I was conned, but, it's a little bit on the nose. But yeah, I do feel like the way Virginia Kahn feels about this novel is totally different from the way I feel about it.
It's time to @ her on Twitter.
Maybe we can bring her on to defend herself.
When Virginia Kahn comes to this novel, she reads the description and she reads these characters and she thinks, well, this is something that Hao Jingfang created. And to me, I say, no, this is just really an unappealing part of the Chinese sensibility that Hao Jingfang selected.
Yeah, that's kind of my reaction. Like I said, it reminded me of people I know in China But the people I knew in China were these, I wouldn't say that I have a negative opinion of them, but these were, once again, 18-year-olds. Like in the US, you'd say they're teenagers who are not very well versed in how the world works. So these people are not people that are particularly interesting. I think maybe if I thought they were made up, then it would be more interesting. But the fact of it is they're not interesting. The way they view the world is so simplistic. I don't know why I would want to have that as an experience.
But part of what's frustrating is that, yes, the kids in this book do have these simplistic views and act on those simplistic views, but the adults don't really make it better either.
Right.
The adults are just as bad, if not, in some cases, much worse.
This is the kind of, I don't want to say whitewashed, because obviously they're in China, but it is this kind of glossed over, idealized version of society that people have in China. They think a teacher, like the one I mentioned before, the 30-something-year-old guy who befriends this 18-year-old, like that teacher behaves in a very honorable, platonic way around an 18-year-old girl. Like that is something that is totally untrue to life, in my experience. And I was not that creepy teacher, just so you know. But I'm saying that human nature does not ring true here. But there's this kind of idealized version that pops up in soap operas. And I feel like that's what she's conveying. It feels like Hao Jingfang's understanding of humanity comes from Chinese soap operas.
I feel like a lot of the characters have one main thing about them, and that maybe there's a second thing hidden for a couple of them. If the character's not well-rounded, we've talked before about how it's okay to have some flatter characters, but when the main character is defined by indecision and confusion, and that's kind of it, you need some other characters that have a little more to them. But the person who was the second most important character in the first third of the book disappears, and other characters take their place, but then it gets more and more muddled as the story goes on, to the point where there's chapters that switch between, I don't know, almost 10 different characters maybe. And the problem is, as it goes on, they become less and less interesting. You have characters that you see inside their heads once when you didn't ever need to see inside their heads at all.
My broader comment about this book and what it made me think of is something that we've talked about quite a lot, because Sam, you and I have attended creative writing programs, master's programs. And we talked about whether or not these programs have a positive or a negative impact on writing in the US. Reading this book is an example of why she really needed to attend a creative writing program, because someone in her life needed to have told her, hey, what you're doing here is bad. Like, don't do this. She needed a workshop. Like, she needed a good reader or a teacher to come in and say, okay, this is working here, but a lot of this is not working. She needs an editor to come in and just clean it up. I don't know why either her editor in China or the editor here in the US didn't do it. I'm assuming because they thought, well, she's pretty well known, so we'll just leave it as is. But she desperately needs a good editor and a teacher. Like, she is so far from being a good writer. This is so far from being a finished product that I'm surprised that it's been published. That's kind of how bad it is. But at the same time, having read some contemporary Chinese works, in China, I think there just isn't that, how do I want to put this delicately? In China, the standards are different. It's easier to get published in China because there isn't that creative writing industry. And so sensibility is different. I think it's much more focused on marketability. When you read about how Ken Liu finds new writers and new stories, he trolls these Tsinghua University forums and sees stories published by Chinese students, and then he takes those and translates them. You know, that's how he finds writers. You kind of get the sense that almost anyone can be published in China. honestly, like I have a former student who got published in China, and it sounds like that's the case. Like almost anyone can get published in China. She's one of those people that I think could really benefit from either like being in a program where she learned how to write or being in a society where they valued better writing, because I guess she gets commercial success. So that's great, good for her. But as an artistic piece, this is rough.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if there were one aspect that was problematic, but there are several, unfortunately. It's not just a single issue. If it was just sentimental, but the ideas were on point and the other descriptions were good or the characters were good, fine. But it's not just sentimental. It's all these other things as well.
Well, this is something that I mentioned last week when we were talking about the three-body problem. I think it applies here as well. In Chinese science fiction, there is respect for science, but there is no respect for fiction. I read Hao Jingfang's essay that she wrote after Folding Beijing was nominated for the Hugo, and she has some comments about fiction that I want to share. First of all, she says that she's not a full-time writer, and she won't become one in the future. I have a job which requires dedication. Writing is like the crystalline bubbles in a tributary of my life. I know where the main stem of my life lies. So she doesn't think it's worthy of her focus and her attention. And then later on she writes, "This is why I won't leave my job. Even if I were to win the Hugo, I won't have much impact on my life. Many of my colleagues in her development organization are not interested in pretty words. They've spent years on their projects, having seen much and accomplished much, but rarely do they talk about what they've done. Their actions tell me that in this superficial world filled with cynical laughter and ironic detachment, there are still some who hold on to their ideals and try to make them come true. Even the most magnificent fireworks will fade after a moment." I think these comments really show that she doesn't think fiction is worth anything at all. She thinks of literature as just pretty words, magnificent fireworks, and any sort of critical nuance or insight is just cynicism or ironic detachment. So I think this is really evident in the quality of this novel. It has nothing to offer artistically, it has nothing to offer intellectually. It's just bland.
Yeah, and once again, you just need those passages quoted and maybe pasted on the walls of every creative writing institution to justify why they exist. Because, man, like that's rough. That's disappointing.
What I'm wondering here, though, is this a missed opportunity for Chinese science fiction? Because people are going to read this novel eventually, and they're going to be really let down. I can't imagine any non-Chinese reader enjoying this novel unless you're Virginia Con.
Well, I hope people who join our subreddit will let us know if they actually enjoyed the novel, and they can tell us if there's something appealing about this novel that we've missed. I think there are chunks of it that are interesting.
Well, yeah, you both have said that there are seeds here. There are some ideas that are good, but James, as you said, they get dropped. They don't get explored to their utmost potential. Or worse, they are treated kind of in this infantile manner sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, Sam, ideas are cheap.
Sure.
Everybody has ideas, but actually doing something with them is really what matters.
All right, then, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll have to think about who would actually enjoy this book. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So, well, who's this book for? Who's the audience here? Is anyone the audience? Is it just Virginia Khan?
I don't want to sound sexist, so forgive me, but maybe young teenage girls who are interested in science fiction and idealistic science fiction at that.
I think they'd have to be Chinese. I think the audience is Chinese people. You get the same people who are interested in Chinese soap operas, but they're also kind of interested in Mars. Maybe that's the audience.
What confuses me is that there were multiple reviews that were praising this, English reviews that were praising this.
I have to go look up those reviews because I had no interest. I don't like, I try to avoid negativity. So because when I finished this book, I was like, I'm done with it now. I just didn't go and look up any reviews because I just thought, what's the point?
There are positive reviews both in Los Angeles Review of Books and also in Locus Magazine, which is a pretty prominent sci-fi magazine. So it's like these people have read a lot of sci-fi and they like it, and they were favorably comparing the novel to Ursula Le Guin. So it's not some bullshit reviewer on Goodreads. It's people who've actually read widely. That's the reason why even after I started this novel, I was willing to keep reading, even though I didn't like it, because I thought there must be something that I'm not seeing here.
I know that you said this earlier, Yed, about how ideas aren't worth too much. I think that in a sci-fi novel, they are important. And I think what she does present to us here is something unique. It's looking at different economic systems. There's some kind of gap. You can say it's a China versus the West kind of culture gap that's being portrayed here. I mean, there is something here. It's not really executed well, but I think there's something here. Maybe for people who have not lived in China, like you alluded to earlier, maybe for those people, it is novel and interesting.
One of the ideas that I do like, she talks about how people from Earth have this idea about Mars. They see it as this dictatorship where everyone lives under this guy, Hans, who rules with an iron fist. And Martian characters know that that's not true. That's not how things are. But the main character wonders, having lived on Earth and heard these people talk like that, is there some truth to that? And she talks at various points about how people on Earth can't understand Mars because they have never gone there. They've never lived or met those people. And people from Mars can't understand Earth because they've never gone there and haven't met and lived with those people. So the main characters are these quote unquote vagabonds who did go to Earth and live there for 5 years and come back. That is interesting. And there are some parallels between the East and the West. But, well, I don't want to give things away, but where that goes is not really anywhere.
Yeah, and once again, I thought it was true to life. The students I had who studied abroad, a lot of them did come back a bit lost. Not all of them, but some of them. So yeah, you read Folding Beijing, which did actually win the Hugo. What did you think about that story?
Much better than Vagabonds. One advantage that it has is it deals with adult characters dealing with adult problems. So it's more serious and more knowledgeable about the world. It's still not a great work of fiction because it has this idea of class inequality in Beijing, but it doesn't do anything with it. Like, it shows you this idea of a Beijing where you have three different distinct social classes that can't interact with each other, but there's no insight. We don't get the opportunity to see how this is reflected to actual Beijing. Like, I feel like there are things that we could say about actual Beijing in terms of class and how people live in this city where I currently live, and she doesn't say anything about it. There's so much opportunity, it's just wasted. It's still good, it's interesting to read. You can finish it in less than an hour, but it's not exciting. It's just an idea taken to its natural conclusion.
Okay, well, I guess that's all we really have to say about this book. If you thought we were way off base, maybe you actually liked more parts of the book than we did, we'd love for you to let us know on Reddit. You can find that link once again below. And you can find us on social media at Canonical Pod. As a reminder, last week we read The Three Body Problem, and if you look in our archives, you can find those episodes. If you're interested in talking about that book, you can also join us on Reddit to chat about that. We'll be back next week with an in-depth discussion of Vagabonds. If you'd like to join our discussion, please do. Go ahead and find a copy of this. See how far you make it through the book. Let us know. Till next time, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.